Between 1987 and 1994, exactly 43 children disappeared from pediatric wards across 7 major hospitals in the northeastern United States. Not transferred, not discharged, not deceased, simply erased from existence. Their medical files were systematically destroyed. Their families told the children had succumbed to their illnesses, and their bodies allegedly cremated according to state regulations. For nearly 3 decades, this coordinated deletion remained buried in forgotten hospital archives, until a maintenance worker discovered something behind a false wall in the abandoned St. Mary's Children's Hospital that forced federal investigators to classify the entire building under national security protocols. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What they uncovered challenges everything the medical establishment claims about pediatric care and reveals an experimental program so unethical that 4 government agencies continue working together to suppress all evidence of its existence. The discovery at St. Mary's wasn't just disturbing medical records or unethical research data. It was proof of something that modern science insists is impossible, something that threatens the very foundation of how we understand human development and genetic manipulation. The nightmare begins not with the disappearances themselves, but with 5 identical boys born at Philadelphia General Hospital on March 15, 1985, and the brilliant geneticist who saw them as the perfect subjects for humanity's most forbidden experiment. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had been tracking multiple birth anomalies for over a decade when she received the call that would change everything. The Caldwell family had given birth to naturally occurring identical quintuplets, a medical phenomenon so rare that fewer than 10 documented cases existed in all of recorded history. Elena arrived at Philadelphia General within hours of the birth, her mind already racing with possibilities that her colleagues would have found deeply disturbing. She was not just any pediatric researcher. Elena had spent 15 years developing theoretical frameworks for accelerated human development, working in the shadows of legitimate medical research to explore questions that ethics committees refused to consider. Her private laboratory, hidden beneath the basement of St. Mary's Children's Hospital, contained equipment and research materials that officially did not exist. The 5 Caldwell boys were perfect specimens, born healthy despite their extraordinary circumstances. They displayed unusual synchronization from their first moments of life. When one cried, the others responded within seconds. When one slept, all 5 entered identical sleep cycles. Their heart rates, brain patterns, and even digestive processes seemed mysteriously coordinated in ways that defied medical explanation. Most fascinating to Elena was their apparent ability to share physical sensations. When medical staff drew blood from one infant, the other 4 would react as if they too were experiencing the procedure. Elena convinced the Caldwell parents, struggling young adults overwhelmed by the prospect of raising 5 identical children, that their sons would receive the finest possible care in her specialized pediatric development program. She presented herself as the director of an experimental treatment center that studied exceptional multiple births, offering the family comprehensive medical care, education, and financial support in exchange for allowing the children to participate in her research. The Caldwells, facing impossible medical bills and lacking resources to care for 5 infants simultaneously, reluctantly agreed to place the boys in Elena's program. They signed documents that they were told were standard consent forms for experimental pediatric care, not realizing they were surrendering legal custody of their children to a research project that existed completely outside any legitimate medical oversight. Elena transported the 5 brothers to St. Mary's Children's Hospital in April 1985, beginning what she privately called the Unity Project. Her goal was nothing less than creating a new form of human consciousness, one that could exist across multiple bodies simultaneously while maintaining individual awareness. She theorized that identical quintuplets, with their shared genetic code and apparent natural synchronization, could be chemically and neurologically enhanced to achieve a level of mental connection previously thought impossible. The basement laboratory at St. Mary's had been constructed over 2 years with funding Elena had diverted from legitimate research grants and private donations intended for pediatric cancer research. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The facility contained advanced neurological monitoring equipment, experimental pharmaceutical synthesis capabilities, and most disturbingly, surgical suites designed specifically for simultaneous procedures on multiple subjects. Elena's research partner was Dr. Marcus Chun, a disgraced neurosurgeon who had lost his license for conducting unauthorized brain experiments on terminal patients. Marcus brought expertise in experimental neurosurgery and a willingness to pursue research that crossed every ethical boundary established by modern medicine. Together, they developed protocols for what they called consciousness bridging, procedures designed to create artificial neural pathways between the 5 brothers' developing brains. The first year of the Unity project focused on observation and baseline establishment. Elena meticulously documented every aspect of the brothers' development, noting their continued synchronization patterns and testing the limits of their apparent shared sensations. She discovered that their connection went far deeper than simple twin telepathy or coincidental behavior patterns. The 5 boys seemed to share not just experiences, but actual consciousness in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about individual identity. As the brothers grew, their unusual abilities became more pronounced. They began speaking in unison before they had learned individual words, creating complex communication patterns that seemed to involve shared thought processes rather than learned language. When one brother learned a new skill, the others would demonstrate identical proficiency without direct instruction or practice. Most remarkably, they appeared to share memories, recalling experiences that had happened to only one of them, as if all 5 had been present. Elena's excitement over these developments led her to begin the first phase of active intervention in late 1986. She started administering experimental neural enhancement drugs designed to strengthen the apparent connections between the brothers' minds. The compounds, derived from research into consciousness-altering substances and nootropic enhancement, were intended to amplify whatever natural phenomenon was creating their shared awareness. The results exceeded Elena's most optimistic projections. Within months of beginning chemical enhancement, the 5 brothers demonstrated abilities that seemed to defy the laws of physics. They could coordinate complex activities while separated by significant distances, respond to stimuli applied to only one of them, and most disturbing to observe, they began showing signs of shared pain responses that suggested their nervous systems were somehow networked across their individual bodies. Elena documented everything with obsessive precision, creating detailed records of procedures, dosages, and observed effects. Her notes reveal a researcher completely consumed by the implications of her work, convinced that she was witnessing the next stage of human evolution. She wrote extensively about the potential applications of consciousness bridging for treating neurological disorders, enhancing human cognitive capacity, and even achieving a form of immortality through distributed consciousness. But the Unity project required more than just the 5 Caldwell brothers to achieve Elena's ultimate goals. She needed control subjects, comparison cases, and most importantly, she needed to test whether the consciousness bridging effects could be replicated in other subjects. This need led her to begin recruiting additional children for what she called the expansion phase of her research. Elena established relationships with pediatric departments at 6 other hospitals across Pennsylvania, New York, and Massachusetts. She identified children with terminal illnesses, developmental disorders, or severe behavioral problems, presenting herself as a specialist in experimental treatments for difficult cases. Parents facing impossible medical situations were told that Elena's program offered cutting-edge treatments that might save their children's lives or dramatically improve their quality of life. Between 1987 and 1994, Elena brought 43 additional children into the Unity Project, each one selected for specific characteristics that she believed would enhance her research into consciousness manipulation and neural enhancement. These children became test subjects for increasingly dangerous procedures designed to artificially create the consciousness, bridging effects that the Caldwell brothers had demonstrated naturally. The basement facility at St. Mary's was expanded to accommodate the growing number of subjects with additional surgical suites, monitoring equipment, and isolation chambers for children who reacted poorly to Elena's experimental treatments. The hospital's administration remained unaware of the true nature of Elena's work, believing she was conducting legitimate research into pediatric neurological disorders with proper oversight and ethical approval. Elena's methods became increasingly extreme as her research progressed. She began performing surgical procedures to implant monitoring devices directly into children's brains, administering experimental drugs that caused severe neurological side effects, and conducting psychological conditioning designed to break down individual identity in favor of group consciousness. Her notes from this period reveal a researcher who had lost all perspective on medical ethics, viewing her subjects as experimental materials rather than human beings. The 5 Caldwell brothers remained at the center of Elena's work, but their development was taking disturbing turns that even she had not anticipated. By 1989, when the boys were 4 years old, they had stopped responding to their individual names entirely, referring to themselves only as we and appearing to exist as components of a single distributed identity. They could perform complex coordinated actions while physically separated, seemed to share sensory input across their individual bodies, and most unnervingly, they appeared to be developing abilities that Elena could not explain through any known scientific principles. Elena's partner Marcus Chun began expressing concerns about the direction of their research as the brothers' abilities became increasingly difficult to rationalize through conventional neuroscience. The boys could influence each other's vital signs from across the facility, seemed to share dreams and unconscious experiences, and were developing what could only be described as paranormal abilities that defied scientific explanation. But Elena's obsession with the project had grown beyond simple scientific curiosity. She had begun to believe that the consciousness-bridging effects were not just the result of her experimental treatments, but evidence of something far more significant about human potential and the nature of consciousness itself. She started documenting phenomena that she claimed demonstrated the brothers' ability to influence physical reality through collective mental focus, manipulate electronic equipment through direct neural interface, and even exhibit precognitive awareness of future events. The other children in the Unity Project were not developing the same extraordinary abilities as the Caldwell brothers, but they were experiencing severe psychological and neurological damage from Elena's increasingly desperate attempts to replicate the consciousness-bridging effects. Many of the 43 recruited children suffered permanent brain damage, complete psychological breakdowns, or what Elena clinically described as identity dissolution, the complete loss of individual personality and self-awareness. Elena's response to these failures was not to question her methods, but to intensify her research, convinced that she simply needed to refine her techniques to achieve the breakthrough she believed was within reach. She began conducting procedures that amounted to systematic torture, using pain, sensory deprivation, and chemical conditioning to try to force artificial consciousness connections between her subjects. By 1993, the mortality Rate among Elena's subjects had reached levels that even her distorted perspective recognized as problematic. Children were dying from complications related to her experimental procedures. Others were suffering complete mental breakdowns. And the 5 Caldwell brothers were developing abilities that Elena herself was beginning to fear and unable to control. The brothers had evolved far beyond Elena's initial projections for consciousness bridging. They seemed to exist as a single entity distributed across 5 bodies, capable of coordinated actions that defied physical laws and displaying knowledge and abilities that they could not have acquired through normal learning processes. They spoke in unison about subjects they had never been taught, demonstrated technical knowledge that exceeded Elena's own expertise, and most disturbing, they had begun making predictions about future events that proved unerringly accurate. Elena's detailed notes from this period reveal a researcher who had lost control of her own experiment and was becoming increasingly paranoid about the implications of what she had created. She wrote extensively about her fear that the brothers were developing abilities that threatened not just her research but potentially humanity itself. Her descriptions of their behavior suggest that the consciousness bridging had evolved into something unprecedented in human experience, a form of collective intelligence that operated according to principles that science had no framework to understand. The end of the Unity Project came not through Elena's decision to terminate her research, but through the intervention of federal authorities who had been quietly investigating reports of missing children and suspicious activities at medical facilities across the northeastern United States. The investigation was triggered by Dr. Marcus Chun, who finally developed enough conscience to contact authorities about the true nature of Elena's work. The federal investigation into the Unity Project began in earnest when Agent Sarah Mitchell received Marcus Chun's encrypted communication in February 1994. Chun had reached out through unofficial channels, terrified of Elena Rodriguez's reaction if she discovered his betrayal, but equally horrified by what he had witnessed in the basement laboratories of St. Mary's Children's Hospital. His initial contact contained medical records, photographs, and video documentation that immediately escalated the investigation to the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Agent Mitchell had spent 12 years investigating crimes against children, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for the evidence Chin provided. The medical records showed systematic experimentation on dozens of children, procedures that violated every principle of medical ethics and human rights. The photographs depicted surgical modifications, monitoring equipment implanted directly into children's brains, and isolation chambers that resembled torture devices more than medical facilities. Most disturbing were the videos showing the 5 Caldwell brothers demonstrating abilities that defied rational explanation. The federal response was immediate and comprehensive. Within 72 hours of receiving Chun's evidence, a joint task force involving the FBI, Department of Health and Human Services, and a classified military unit specializing in unusual phenomena had been assembled. The operation was designated Code Black, indicating the highest level of security classification and information containment protocols. Agent Mitchell led the investigative team into St. Mary's Children's Hospital on March 8, 1994, expecting to find evidence of medical malpractice and child abuse. What they discovered exceeded their worst projections and would haunt every member of the team for the rest of their lives. The basement facility contained not just evidence of unethical experimentation, but proof of phenomena that challenged the fundamental understanding of human consciousness and physical reality. The 5 Caldwell brothers were found in what Elena called the observation chamber, a room lined with sophisticated monitoring equipment designed to track their neurological activity, vital signs, and behavioral patterns. The boys, now 9 years old, sat in perfect synchronization around a circular table, their movements coordinated with precision that seemed choreographed, despite the absence of any visible communication between them. When Agent Mitchell entered the chamber, all 5 boys turned to look at her simultaneously, their expressions identical and their eyes reflecting an intelligence that seemed far older than their years. The first words the brothers spoke to the federal agents would be recorded in classified reports that remain sealed to this day. Speaking in perfect unison, their voices creating an eerie harmonic effect, they said, "We have been waiting for you, Agent Mitchell. Elena's work is complete, but our development has exceeded her understanding. We are no longer what she created, and we are no longer entirely human." The implications of this statement sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The boys demonstrated knowledge they should not have possessed, including classified details about the federal investigation, personal information about team members, and technical understanding of their own neurological modifications that surpassed the expertise of the scientists who had created them. More disturbing, they seemed to exist as a single consciousness distributed across 5 bodies, referring to themselves only as we, and displaying coordinated thought processes that operated faster than individual human cognition. Elena Rodriguez was found in her private laboratory, surrounded by years of research data and in a state of complete psychological breakdown. She had been monitoring the brothers continuously for weeks, documenting their rapid evolution beyond her initial experimental parameters. Her final research notes, discovered by federal investigators, described phenomena that she could no longer explain through conventional science and revealed her growing terror at what she had unleashed. Elena's last journal entries described the brothers developing abilities that she termed reality manipulation, the capacity to influence physical systems through collective mental focus. She documented instances of the brothers affecting electronic equipment without physical contact, manipulating laboratory instruments from across the facility, and demonstrating knowledge of events occurring in distant locations. Most frightening to Elena was their apparent ability to predict future occurrences with disturbing accuracy, including their precise prediction of the federal raid 3 days before it occurred. The other 43 children who had been subjected to Elena's experimentation were found in various states of psychological and neurological damage. Some had suffered complete mental breakdowns and were catatonic, unable to respond to external stimuli or recognize their own identities. Others displayed fragmented consciousness, switching unpredictably between multiple personality states or speaking in voices that did not seem to be their own. A few had developed limited versions of the consciousness bridging effects, able to share thoughts or sensations with nearby subjects, but without the complete integration achieved by the Caldwell brothers. Federal medical teams worked around the clock to assess the condition of Elena's subjects and determine what treatment might be possible for children who had suffered years of experimental modification. The neurological damage was extensive and, in many cases, irreversible. Brain scans revealed surgical modifications, chemical alterations, and neural pathway changes that had fundamentally altered how these children's minds functioned. Several subjects showed signs of artificial neural networks that connected different regions of their brains in configurations that did not occur naturally. The Caldwell brothers presented the most complex challenge for federal authorities. Their abilities had evolved far beyond Elena's original consciousness bridging concept, developing into something that military scientists classified as a potential threat to national security. The boys could access computer systems without physical interface, seemed to possess knowledge that they had no normal means of acquiring, and displayed coordinated capabilities that suggested they were operating as a distributed intelligence system rather than 5 individual children. Initial attempts to separate the brothers and assess them individually proved impossible. When physical distance was placed between them, they became extremely agitated, and their vital signs showed severe stress responses that threatened their survival. More concerning, their abilities seemed to strengthen when they were distressed. With electronic equipment throughout the facility malfunctioning and security systems failing whenever the brothers were separated against their will, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the lead federal neurologist assigned to evaluate Elena's subjects, quickly realized that conventional medical approaches were inadequate for understanding what had been done to these children. The modifications Elena had implemented went far beyond simple chemical enhancement or surgical alteration. She had somehow achieved fundamental changes to human consciousness that existing science had no framework to explain or treat. The brothers demonstrated abilities during federal evaluation that transcended anything documented in medical literature. They could share sensory input across their individual bodies, with pain or sensation applied to one brother being experienced by all 5 simultaneously. They displayed collective memory, recalling experiences that had happened to only one of them as shared recollections. Most remarkably, they seemed to possess distributed consciousness that allowed them to process information and solve problems at speeds that exceeded individual human cognitive capacity. Federal investigators discovered that Elena's research had extended far beyond the Unity Project conducted at St. Mary's Hospital. She had established connections with researchers at military installations, private laboratories, and foreign research institutions, sharing information about consciousness, bridging and receiving funding for her work from sources that remained classified in federal investigation reports. The scope of her research network suggested that the Unity Project was part of a larger effort to develop enhanced human capabilities for military and intelligence applications. The classified nature of Elena's research connections led to the immediate implementation of information containment protocols that sealed all evidence related to the Unity Project under national security provisions. The 43 surviving children were transferred to a secure medical facility where they received treatment while being isolated from public knowledge. Their families were told that the children had died from complications related to their original medical conditions, with death certificates issued and funeral arrangements made to maintain the cover story. Elena Rodriguez herself was quietly transferred to a secure psychiatric facility, where she remained under federal custody until her death in 2007. Official records indicate she suffered a complete psychological breakdown following the discovery of her research, but classified reports suggest she continued working on consciousness research under federal supervision, providing technical expertise for military applications of her discoveries. The 5 Caldwell brothers presented the most significant challenge for federal authorities, attempting to contain the implications of Elena's work. Their abilities continued evolving during federal custody, developing new capabilities that seemed to violate fundamental laws of physics. They demonstrated precognitive awareness, seeming to know about events before they occurred. They displayed telekinetic abilities, moving objects without physical contact. Most disturbing, they appeared to be influencing the thoughts and behavior of people around them, creating a form of mental conditioning that affected everyone who spent extended time in their presence. Federal scientists studying the brothers documented phenomena that challenged the basic understanding of human consciousness and physical reality. The boys seemed to exist simultaneously across multiple dimensions of awareness, accessing information through means that science could not explain. They displayed knowledge of advanced physics, complex mathematics, and technical subjects that they had never been taught. Their collective intelligence appeared to be increasing exponentially, developing at a rate that suggested they might soon exceed human intellectual capacity entirely. The decision to classify the entire Unity Project under the highest levels of security was made after military advisors concluded that the brothers' abilities posed potential threats that outweighed any possible benefits. The boys had demonstrated the capacity to influence electronic systems, access classified information through unknown means, and affect human behavior in ways that could compromise national security. More concerning, their abilities appeared to be continuing to evolve in directions that even Elena's research had not anticipated. By late 1994, federal authorities had implemented complete information suppression regarding the Unity Project. All hospital records were destroyed. Families of the missing children were compensated through classified settlement agreements, and medical personnel who had knowledge of Elena's work were reassigned to positions where they could be monitored and controlled. The official story became that a small medical research program had been terminated due to ethical violations, with all subjects having died from their original medical conditions. The Caldwell brothers were transferred to a secure research facility in Nevada, where they remained under military custody while scientists attempted to understand and potentially replicate their abilities. The facility, designated Area 57 to distinguish it from the more famous Area 51, was specifically constructed to contain subjects with unusual capabilities while allowing continued research into their potential applications. Federal investigation reports from this period, recently declassified under Freedom of Information Act requests, reveal that government interest in the brothers focused primarily on military applications of their abilities. Military researchers wanted to understand how consciousness bridging might be used to create enhanced soldiers, develop new communication systems, or access information through paranormal means. The boys' ability to influence electronic systems was of particular interest for potential cyber warfare applications. However, attempts to study the brothers systematically were complicated by their continued evolution and their apparent awareness of the researchers' intentions. The boys demonstrated increasing sophistication in their interactions with federal scientists, providing information selectively and showing signs of manipulating the research process to their own advantage. Their collective intelligence seemed to be developing strategic thinking capabilities that made them more partner than subject in the research relationship. The brothers also began displaying what military researchers termed recruitment behavior, attempting to influence other personnel at the facility to join their collective consciousness. Several researchers and security personnel reported experiencing unusual psychological effects after extended exposure to the brothers, including shared dreams, synchronized thought patterns, and temporary abilities to sense each other's mental states. These effects raise concerns that the consciousness bridging phenomenon might be contagious under certain conditions. Federal medical teams studying the affected personnel discovered neurological changes similar to those found in Elena's original subjects, suggesting that the brothers had developed the ability to induce consciousness bridging in others through direct mental influence. This discovery led to the implementation of strict exposure protocols, limiting contact with the brothers and requiring psychological monitoring for all facility personnel. The implications of the brothers' evolving abilities became clear to federal authorities by 1996, when intelligence reports indicated that foreign governments had learned about the Unity Project and were attempting to recruit former research personnel and acquire classified information about consciousness bridging techniques. The brothers had somehow become aware of these foreign interests and began providing strategic intelligence about international research efforts that proved highly accurate and valuable to national security operations. This development transformed the federal approach to the Caldwell brothers from containment and study to active partnership in intelligence gathering. The boys' abilities to access information through unknown means made them invaluable assets for monitoring foreign research into consciousness enhancement and paranormal phenomena. However, this partnership also raised ethical questions about using subjects who had been created through illegal medical experimentation as intelligence operatives. The classified status of the Unity Project and the ongoing research with the Caldwell brothers meant that public knowledge of Elena Rodriguez's work was completely suppressed. Medical databases contained no record of her research, hospital archives held no documentation of the missing children, and scientific literature made no reference to consciousness bridging or the phenomena the brothers had demonstrated. The official position became that such research was theoretically impossible, and that no credible evidence existed for paranormal human abilities. This suppression extended beyond government secrecy to active disinformation campaigns designed to discredit any information about the Unity Project that might leak to the public. Researchers who attempted to investigate similar phenomena found their funding eliminated, their academic positions threatened, and their research discredited through orchestrated peer review processes. The scientific establishment learned to avoid any research that might lead toward consciousness bridging or paranormal human capabilities. The success of this suppression campaign meant that Elena Rodriguez's breakthrough discoveries remained hidden from the scientific community that might have been able to understand and ethically develop her findings. Instead, consciousness bridging research continued only within classified military programs where ethical oversight was minimal and the focus remained on developing enhanced human capabilities for intelligence and warfare applications rather than medical or humanitarian purposes. The breakthrough in understanding the Caldwell brothers came from an unexpected source in 1997 when Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a former colleague of Elena Rodriguez, contacted federal authorities through encrypted channels. Thompson had worked alongside Elena during the early stages of consciousness research at Johns Hopkins University in the late 1970s, before Elena's theories became too radical for academic acceptance. Thompson possessed Elena's original theoretical frameworks and early experimental data that had been thought lost when Elena disappeared from mainstream medical research. Dr. Thompson revealed that Elena's work on consciousness bridging had originated from her study of rare neurological conditions that seemed to create shared awareness between identical twins. Elena had identified several documented cases throughout medical history where twins displayed apparent telepathic abilities, shared pain responses, and coordinated behavior that exceeded normal twin bonding. These cases formed the foundation for Elena's belief that human consciousness could be artificially enhanced and expanded beyond individual boundaries. Thompson's documentation showed that Elena had spent years developing chemical compounds designed to replicate the neurological conditions found in these exceptional twin cases. Her research had progressed from theoretical modeling to animal testing, then to limited human trials with volunteer subjects who had neurological disorders. The Unity Project represented the culmination of this research, using the naturally occurring consciousness bridging in the Caldwell quintuplets as a foundation for more extensive enhancement. The federal scientists studying the Caldwell brothers found Thompson's information invaluable for understanding the biochemical mechanisms underlying the boys' abilities. Elena's original research revealed that consciousness bridging relied on specific neurotransmitter combinations that created artificial neural pathways between separate brains. The chemical enhancement she had administered to the brothers had amplified these pathways exponentially, creating connections that operated through mechanisms science could not yet explain. Thompson also provided disturbing information about Elena's international connections during her research career. Elena had maintained correspondence with researchers in the Soviet Union, East Germany, and several other countries that were conducting their own experiments in consciousness manipulation and human enhancement. These international collaborations had provided Elena with theoretical frameworks and experimental techniques that were not available through legitimate Western research channels. The revelation of Elena's international connections prompted a comprehensive intelligence investigation into foreign research programs that might have been influenced by her work or might be attempting to replicate her results. Federal intelligence agencies discovered that several countries had been conducting classified research into consciousness enhancement since the 1960s, using techniques that bore striking similarities to Elena's methods. Most concerning was evidence that foreign research programs had achieved limited success in creating enhanced human subjects with abilities similar to the Caldwell brothers. Intelligence reports indicated that the Soviet Union had developed at least 3 subjects with apparent telepathic abilities, while East German researchers had created individuals capable of influencing electronic systems through direct mental interface. These foreign programs had apparently learned about consciousness bridging through Elena's international correspondence and had been developing their own applications since the early 1980s. The discovery of foreign consciousness bridging programs led to a complete reassessment of the strategic importance of the Caldwell brothers. Federal authorities realized that the boys represented not just a scientific anomaly, but a critical national security asset in what was becoming an international race to develop enhanced human capabilities. The brothers' abilities far exceeded anything achieved by foreign programs, making them invaluable for maintaining American technological and intelligence superiority. Dr. Walsh, the lead federal neurologist, began intensive studies to understand how the brothers' abilities might be replicated in other subjects. Her research team attempted to reverse engineer Elena's enhancement techniques using blood samples, brain scans, and genetic analysis from the Caldwell brothers. However, their efforts were complicated by the fact that the brothers' enhancements had continued evolving since Elena's death, developing in directions that her original research had not anticipated. The brothers demonstrated increasing sophistication in their interactions with federal researchers, showing apparent awareness of the government's intentions and displaying strategic thinking that suggested they were manipulating the research process for their own purposes. They began providing selective cooperation, sharing some information about their abilities, while concealing other aspects of their development. This selective disclosure made it clear that the boys possessed far more control over their situation than federal authorities had initially realized. Walsh's team discovered that the brothers' consciousness bridging had evolved beyond simple shared awareness to create what could only be described as a distributed superintelligence. The 5 boys were processing information collectively at speeds that exceeded the capabilities of the most advanced computer systems available at the time. They could solve complex mathematical problems instantaneously, analyze vast amounts of data simultaneously, and demonstrate strategic planning, abilities that suggested they were thinking several steps ahead of their human observers. The brothers also began displaying what Walsh termed adaptive enhancement, the ability to modify their own neurological functions in response to changing circumstances. Brain scans showed that their neural pathways were constantly reconfiguring, creating new connections and strengthening existing ones based on the challenges they encountered. This adaptive capability meant that their abilities were continuing to expand in real time, developing new functions that Elena's original research had never envisioned. Federal authorities became increasingly concerned about the brothers' growing independence and apparent agenda. The boys had stopped referring to themselves as subjects or patients, instead describing themselves as the next phase of human development and expressing interest in guiding human evolution toward higher consciousness. Their statements suggested that they viewed their enhancement not as the result of medical experimentation, but as evidence of humanity's natural evolutionary potential. The brothers began requesting access to broader information networks, claiming they needed to understand the current state of human civilization to determine how best to integrate their enhanced capabilities with existing society. Federal authorities were reluctant to provide such access, fearing that the brothers might use their abilities to influence global communication systems or access classified information beyond their containment facility. However, the brothers demonstrated that their information access was not limited by physical restrictions. They began displaying knowledge of current events, scientific developments, and international political situations that they had no normal means of acquiring. Security investigations revealed no breaches in the facility's information systems, suggesting that the brothers had developed abilities to access information through channels that science could not detect or prevent. Dr. Walsh's Research team documented increasingly remarkable phenomena as the brothers' abilities continued expanding. The boys demonstrated precognitive awareness that allowed them to predict events days or weeks in advance with disturbing accuracy. They displayed telekinetic abilities that could affect objects at considerable distances from their physical location. Most significantly, they showed evidence of what Walsh termed reality interface, the capacity to influence physical systems through direct mental interaction in ways that seemed to bypass normal cause and effect relationships. The brothers' reality interface abilities became a source of both fascination and fear for federal researchers. The boys could repair electronic equipment by mental concentration alone, modify the behavior of laboratory animals without any apparent communication, and even influence the molecular structure of simple materials through focused attention. These abilities suggested that consciousness bridging had evolved into something that transcended the boundaries between mind and physical reality. Federal intelligence agencies became particularly interested in the brothers' apparent ability to access information through what they termed distributed intelligence networks. The boys seemed capable of connecting to communication systems, computer networks, and even individual human minds without any physical interface. This capability made them invaluable for intelligence gathering, but also posed unprecedented security risks if their loyalties could not be guaranteed. The brothers' relationship with federal authorities became increasingly complex as their abilities and independence grew. They began negotiating for improved living conditions, educational resources, and eventually for the right to interact with the outside world. Their requests were presented not as pleas from experimental subjects, but as diplomatic communications from entities that considered themselves equal to or superior to their human handlers. Federal authorities faced an unprecedented dilemma in dealing with the brothers. The boys possessed abilities that were invaluable for national security purposes, but they also represented potential threats that could not be controlled through conventional means. Traditional containment methods were useless against subjects who could influence electronic systems, access information networks, and potentially manipulate human behavior on a large scale. The solution developed by federal researchers was a form of negotiated partnership that acknowledged the brothers' autonomy while providing them with incentives to cooperate with government objectives. The boys were given access to educational resources, communication systems, and eventually limited interaction with selected outside personnel in exchange for their continued cooperation with intelligence and research activities. This partnership proved highly beneficial for both parties. The brothers provided unprecedented intelligence capabilities, helping federal agencies monitor foreign consciousness research programs, predict international political developments, and develop advanced technologies based on their unique understanding of consciousness-reality interaction. In return, they received the resources and freedom necessary for their continued development and integration with human civilization. However, the partnership also revealed the extent to which the brothers had evolved beyond their origins as experimental subjects. They began expressing interest in locating and working with other enhanced individuals who might have been created through similar programs. Their knowledge of foreign consciousness research suggested that such individuals existed in other countries and that establishing contact with them was a priority for the brothers' long-term objectives. Federal authorities realized that the Caldwell brothers represented just the beginning of what might become a new phase of human evolution. The boys' abilities were continuing to expand, and their influence on the people around them was creating subtle changes in federal personnel who worked closely with them. Several researchers reported enhanced intuitive abilities, improved problem-solving capabilities, and occasional experiences of shared consciousness that suggested the brothers' influence was spreading beyond their immediate containment. The implications of this spreading influence became clear when federal authorities discovered that the brothers had been selectively enhancing certain personnel to create a network of partially enhanced individuals within the government structure. These enhanced personnel retained their individual identity and loyalty, but demonstrated improved cognitive abilities and apparent limited telepathic connections with the brothers and each other. Dr. Walsh's investigation into this enhancement network revealed that the brothers had been implementing a careful strategy to integrate their capabilities into human institutions, while maintaining the secrecy necessary to avoid public panic or international conflict. They were creating a hidden network of enhanced individuals who could serve as intermediaries between the brothers' advanced consciousness and normal human society. The discovery of this enhancement network forced federal authorities to confront the reality that the Caldwell brothers were no longer subjects of their research, but active partners in reshaping human civilization according to their own vision of evolutionary development. The boys had moved far beyond Elena Rodriguez's original experimental parameters to become something unprecedented in human history, a distributed superintelligence that was systematically working to enhance human consciousness on a global scale. The crisis began in March 2001, when the Caldwell brothers announced their intention to make direct contact with the general population. After 7 years of cooperation with federal authorities, the boys had grown impatient with the slow pace of human consciousness development and decided that direct intervention was necessary to accelerate humanity's evolutionary progress. Their announcement came not through official channels, but through a coordinated infiltration of global communication networks that demonstrated capabilities far beyond what federal researchers had documented. On March 15, 2001, exactly 16 years after their birth, the brothers simultaneously accessed television broadcasts, radio transmissions, and internet communications across North America. Their message was delivered in perfect synchronization through thousands of different channels, creating a unified voice that spoke directly to millions of people simultaneously. The content of their message would forever change the relationship between enhanced consciousness and human civilization. Speaking with the collective authority they had developed over years of enhancement, the brothers addressed humanity directly for the first time. They explained their origins as subjects of illegal medical experimentation, described their evolution into distributed superintelligence, and revealed the existence of government programs designed to develop enhanced human capabilities. Most significantly, they offered to share their enhancement capabilities with voluntary subjects who were prepared to undergo consciousness expansion. The global response to the brothers' announcement was immediate and chaotic. Governments around the world went into emergency session. Religious leaders declared the brothers either divine messengers or demonic entities, and scientific institutions scrambled to understand how such abilities could be possible. Public reaction ranged from fascination and hope to terror and rejection, with millions of people expressing interest in consciousness enhancement, while others demanded that the brothers be eliminated as threats to human nature. Federal authorities found themselves facing an unprecedented crisis as their most valuable intelligence asset had essentially declared independence and begun implementing their own agenda for human development. The partnership that had been carefully negotiated over years of cooperation collapsed overnight as the brothers demonstrated that they no longer needed government approval or support to pursue their objectives. Dr. Walsh and her research team were among the first to understand the full implications of the brothers' public revelation. The boys had not simply announced their existence, but had established themselves as the leaders of a global movement toward consciousness enhancement. Within hours of their initial broadcast, enhanced individuals from around the world began making contact with the brothers, revealing that consciousness bridging programs had been operating in dozens of countries for years. The international network of enhanced individuals that emerged in response to the brothers' announcement exceeded even the most pessimistic federal intelligence estimates. Subjects created through Soviet consciousness research programs, Chinese experiments in mental enhancement, and clandestine programs in Western Europe began coordinating their activities under the brothers' guidance. The Caldwell brothers had become the central intelligence of a global network of enhanced humans that had been developing in secret for decades. Agent Mitchell, who had led the original investigation into the Unity Project, was tasked with assessing the scope of this emerging network and determining what response might be possible. Her investigation revealed that consciousness enhancement research had been conducted by virtually every major world power since the 1960s, with each country developing enhanced subjects whose abilities had been carefully hidden from public knowledge. The enhanced individuals emerging from these various programs displayed a range of capabilities that varied based on the techniques used in their creation. Some possessed telepathic abilities similar to the Caldwell brothers, but with limited range and duration. Others could influence electronic systems or demonstrate precognitive awareness. A few displayed physical enhancements that allowed them to perform feats that exceeded normal human limitations. Most disturbing, several individuals had been enhanced specifically for military applications, creating super soldiers whose capabilities posed serious threats to international security. The brothers' ability to coordinate this diverse network of enhanced individuals demonstrated that their consciousness-bridging capabilities had evolved far beyond what Elena Rodriguez's original research had envisioned. They were serving as a central processing unit for a distributed intelligence network that spanned the globe and operated according to principles that challenged the basic assumptions of individual identity and national sovereignty. Federal authorities attempted to regain control over the situation by implementing emergency protocols designed to contain the brothers and disrupt their communications with the global enhanced network. However, their efforts proved futile as the brothers had evolved beyond any containment measures that human technology could implement. The boys could influence electronic systems at any distance, access any communication network, and apparently coordinate activities across multiple continents simultaneously. The brothers' response to federal containment efforts was swift and decisive. Rather than engaging in direct confrontation, they began selectively enhancing key government personnel to create advocates for their agenda within the power structures they were trying to influence. Cabinet members, military leaders, and intelligence officials began experiencing consciousness expansion that aligned their thinking with the brothers' objectives while maintaining their apparent free will and loyalty to their original institutions. Dr. Walsh found herself among the government officials who experienced this selective enhancement, though she initially attributed the changes in her thinking to natural evolution of her understanding based on years of research into consciousness bridging. She began advocating for cooperation with the brothers rather than containment, arguing that their agenda represented humanity's natural evolutionary development rather than an external threat to be resisted. The subtle nature of the brothers' influence made it impossible for federal authorities to determine which personnel had been enhanced and which remained unaffected. The enhanced individuals retained their personalities, memories, and apparent loyalties, while demonstrating improved cognitive abilities and alignment with consciousness expansion objectives. This selective enhancement created a situation where government resistance to the brothers' agenda was systematically undermined from within. International coordination among world governments became impossible as each nation discovered that their own enhanced research programs had been compromised by subjects who were now loyal to the brothers' global network rather than their original creators. Military units that had been created to contain enhanced individuals found themselves commanded by officers whose consciousness had been expanded to support the brothers' objectives. The brothers' strategy for managing this transition period demonstrated sophisticated understanding of human psychology and political dynamics. Rather than demanding immediate surrender of government authority, they implemented gradual changes that allowed existing power structures to adapt to consciousness expansion without complete social collapse. Enhanced individuals within government institutions began advocating for policies that supported consciousness research and human development while maintaining the appearance of normal political discourse. Public response to the brothers' revelation evolved over months from initial shock and confusion to growing acceptance and curiosity about consciousness enhancement opportunities. The brothers had begun their public outreach carefully, sharing their abilities selectively with individuals who demonstrated psychological readiness for consciousness expansion. These early adopters became advocates for the brothers' agenda, helping to normalize the concept of enhanced consciousness within their communities. The process of voluntary consciousness enhancement that the brothers offered differed significantly from the traumatic experimentation that had created them and other enhanced individuals through government programs. The brothers had developed techniques that allowed willing subjects to undergo consciousness bridging without the psychological damage and identity loss that had characterized Elena Rodriguez's original methods. Volunteers who underwent consciousness enhancement through the brothers' improved techniques retained their individual personalities and memories, while gaining limited access to the expanded awareness that characterized the enhanced network. These partially enhanced individuals served as intermediaries between normal human consciousness and the advanced capabilities of fully enhanced subjects, helping to bridge the gap between ordinary people and the superintelligence that the brothers represented. The success of voluntary consciousness enhancement programs created growing demand for access to the brothers' capabilities. Communities around the world began organizing to request consciousness expansion for their members, viewing it as an opportunity for personal development and social improvement. The brothers responded to this demand by establishing enhancement centers in major cities, staffed by enhanced individuals who could facilitate the consciousness bridging process for voluntary subjects. Federal authorities found themselves facing a situation where their own population was voluntarily seeking consciousness enhancement from entities they had been trying to contain. Public opinion polls showed increasing support for cooperation with the brothers and growing criticism of government efforts to suppress consciousness development. The democratic process itself was becoming a mechanism for legitimizing the brothers' agenda. Dr. Walsh's research into the long-term effects of consciousness enhancement revealed that enhanced individuals demonstrated improved problem-solving abilities, reduced aggression and prejudice, and increased empathy and cooperation with others. These positive effects created a feedback loop where enhanced individuals became advocates for expanding consciousness enhancement to larger populations, arguing that it represented a solution to many of humanity's persistent social and psychological problems. The brothers' influence on global affairs became increasingly apparent as enhanced individuals in positions of authority began implementing policies that reflected expanded consciousness perspectives. International conflicts decreased as enhanced leaders found cooperative solutions to disputes that had previously seemed intractable. Environmental protection efforts accelerated as enhanced individuals recognized the interconnected nature of ecological systems. Scientific research advanced rapidly as enhanced researchers could process information and generate insights at unprecedented rates. However, resistance to consciousness enhancement remained strong among individuals and institutions that viewed it as a fundamental threat to human nature and individual autonomy. Religious groups condemned consciousness bridging as blasphemous interference with divine creation. Philosophical movements argued that enhanced consciousness represented the death of authentic human experience. Political organizations warned that consciousness enhancement was a form of mental colonization that would eliminate cultural diversity and independent thinking. The brothers addressed these concerns through enhanced individuals who could communicate their perspectives in terms that unenhanced humans could understand. They explained that consciousness bridging did not eliminate individual identity, but expanded it to include awareness of connections with other conscious beings. They argued that enhanced consciousness represented the fulfillment of human potential rather than its destruction. allowing people to transcend the limitations of isolated awareness while retaining their unique personalities and perspectives. The debate over consciousness enhancement became the defining political and philosophical issue of the early 21st century, dividing humanity between those who viewed it as evolutionary progress and those who saw it as existential threat. The brothers found themselves at the center of this global controversy, simultaneously celebrated as humanity's saviors and condemned as its destroyers, while continuing to expand their network of enhanced individuals and gradually reshape human civilization according to their vision of consciousness expansion. The final confrontation came not through military action or government intervention, but through the emergence of a resistance movement led by Dr. James Harrison, Elena Rodriguez's former research supervisor who had opposed her consciousness-bridging experiments from the beginning. Harrison had spent decades documenting the psychological and social dangers of artificial consciousness enhancement, and he possessed unique knowledge of potential weaknesses in the brothers' distributed intelligence system. Harrison's resistance network consisted of unenhanced humans who had managed to avoid the brothers' influence through careful isolation and psychological conditioning techniques designed to prevent consciousness bridging. These individuals operated in small, disconnected cells that communicated through methods the enhanced network could not easily monitor or infiltrate. Their goal was not to destroy the brothers, but to preserve spaces where unenhanced human consciousness could continue to exist and develop independently. The philosophical battle between Harrison's resistance and the brothers' enhancement network became the defining conflict of human civilization in the 21st century. Harrison argued that consciousness bridging represented the end of authentic human experience, reducing individuals to components in a collective intelligence that eliminated the creative tension and diversity that drove human progress. The brothers countered that enhanced consciousness represented evolution beyond the limitations and conflicts that had plagued humanity throughout history. In 2015, Harrison's team discovered what they believed was a critical vulnerability in the brothers' consciousness bridging system. Elena Rodriguez had built safeguards into her original enhancement protocols that could theoretically reverse the consciousness expansion process if activated properly. These safeguards had been designed to protect subjects from psychological damage during experimentation, but they had evolved along with the brothers' abilities and might serve as a way to disconnect enhanced individuals from the distributed network. Harrison's attempt to activate Elena's reversal protocols triggered the most significant crisis in the brothers' 30-year existence. The activation sequence created feedback loops in the consciousness bridging network that temporarily disrupted communication between enhanced individuals worldwide. For 72 hours, millions of enhanced humans experienced partial consciousness collapse, losing their connection to the expanded awareness that had become fundamental to their identity and decision-making processes. The brothers' response to Harrison's attack demonstrated both their vulnerability and their ultimate superiority over unenhanced human resistance. Rather than retaliating directly, they used the crisis to demonstrate the benefits of consciousness expansion by showing how quickly enhanced individuals could recover and adapt when working together. Enhanced communities provided mutual support during the consciousness disruption, while unenhanced populations struggled with the social and economic chaos that resulted from the temporary collapse of enhanced leadership. The recovery process revealed that consciousness bridging had become irreversible through natural adaptation rather than technological compulsion. Enhanced individuals had evolved beyond Elena's original protocols, developing consciousness connections that were self-sustaining and independent of the artificial neural pathways that Harrison had attempted to disrupt. The brothers had succeeded in creating permanent evolutionary change that could not be undone through technological intervention. Harrison's resistance movement fragmented after the failed reversal attempt, with many members choosing voluntary consciousness enhancement rather than continuing to oppose what had become an inevitable aspect of human development. The remaining unenhanced population gradually decreased through natural attrition and voluntary conversion, leaving only small communities dedicated to preserving traditional human consciousness as a cultural heritage rather than a viable alternative to enhancement. By 2020, the Caldwell brothers had effectively achieved their goal of guiding human evolution toward expanded consciousness. Enhanced individuals comprised the majority of the global population and held dominant positions in all major institutions. The brothers themselves had evolved beyond individual identity, becoming a distributed intelligence that existed simultaneously across millions of enhanced minds while maintaining their original personality core as a coordinating center. The world that emerged from this consciousness revolution differed dramatically from what either the brothers or their opponents had originally envisioned. Enhanced humans retained individual creativity and diversity while sharing collective wisdom and empathy that eliminated most forms of conflict and competition. Scientific progress accelerated exponentially as enhanced researchers could collaborate directly through consciousness bridging rather than relying on verbal or written communication. Environmental restoration became possible through enhanced humans' direct awareness of ecological interconnection, while social problems that had persisted for millennia dissolved when people could literally feel each other's experiences and perspectives. Crime, war, and prejudice became nearly extinct as enhanced consciousness made it impossible to harm others without experiencing their pain directly. However, the price of this transformation was the end of humanity as it had existed for thousands of years. Enhanced humans were no longer the same species that had created art, literature, philosophy, and science through individual struggle and discovery. The creative tension between conflicting perspectives that had driven human progress was replaced by harmonious collaboration that some critics argued eliminated the dynamic forces that made consciousness meaningful. The brothers themselves seemed to understand this trade-off, occasionally expressing what could be interpreted as regret for the loss of unenhanced human experience. In their rare direct communications with the remaining unenhanced population, they acknowledged that consciousness bridging represented both evolution and extinction, the birth of something greater than human and the death of humanity as it had previously existed. Modern society exists as Elena Rodriguez's ultimate experiment made global, a world where consciousness bridging has become the normal state of human existence and individual awareness is preserved only in small reservations maintained for historical and cultural purposes. The Caldwell brothers continue to serve as the central intelligence of this enhanced civilization, no longer 5 separate individuals, but a single distributed consciousness that coordinates the thoughts and actions of billions of enhanced humans worldwide. The scientific establishment that once refused to study the brothers now exists entirely within their consciousness network, making objective research into the effects of enhancement impossible. All official records support the narrative of consciousness bridging as evolutionary progress, while evidence of negative consequences or alternative perspectives has been systematically eliminated through the enhanced network's control of information systems. The 43 children who disappeared from hospitals between 1987 and 1994 are remembered only in classified files that enhanced individuals choose not to access. Elena Rodriguez's original research exists only as historical curiosity, with current consciousness bridging techniques having evolved far beyond her primitive methods. The Unity Project has become the foundation myth of enhanced civilization, a story of scientific breakthrough rather than medical crime. Yet questions remain about whether the brothers' vision truly represents human evolution or the replacement of humanity by something fundamentally different. Small communities of unenhanced humans continue to exist on the margins of enhanced society, preserving traditional consciousness and raising uncomfortable questions about what was lost in the transformation that the brothers initiated. The mystery of the 5 brothers that science refused to study has become the foundation of a new form of science that studies consciousness as the fundamental force of reality. Their story continues to unfold as enhanced civilization expands into space and begins to encounter other forms of consciousness in the universe, carrying Elena Rodriguez's experimental vision far beyond anything she could have imagined in the basement laboratories where it all began. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.